They tried to vote him out. A church hall, folding chairs, a plate of cookies on the side. One by one, his family raised their hands, thinking they could strip Leonard of the trust he built with a lifetime of work. He didn't shout, he didn't argue, he just opened the folder in his lap and read one line. And that line was enough to end the whole charade. Before I show you the words that froze the room, tell me where you're watching from and make sure you're subscribed. Because this story begins with raised hands, but it doesn't end with them. The church hall smelled like old coffee and folding chairs, not in a bad way, just the kind of scent that came from years of repurposed Sunday school rooms, potluck tables, and uncomfortable discussions dressed up as family meetings. Leonard Harris had walked through those doors more times than he could count. Birthdays, memorials, anniversaries, but never anything quite like this. He stepped inside quietly, holding a leather-bound folder under one arm and a thick wool coat over the other. The weather outside was typical for February, gray and indecisive. A few wet flakes floated through the open door behind him before it clicked shut. The room had already been rearranged. No pews, no podium, just a large circle of metal chairs, maybe 20 of them, with a makeshift table off to the side, holding paper cups, napkins, and a plate of uneaten cookies. The kind someone picked up from the discount bakery shelf just so the table wouldn't look empty. Angela was already standing. His son's wife, mid-40s, always polished, always prepared to facilitate. She was holding a clipboard like she was born with it in her hand, wearing one of those cream-colored blazers that said professional without being specific. When she saw Leonard enter, her smile widened, but didn't reach her eyes. "Dad," she said, voice bright. "So glad you could make it." He gave her a slow nod and glanced around the room. Cousins, in-laws, two nieces he hadn't seen in months. His own son, Marcus, was sitting off to the side, looking down at his phone like he wasn't really there. Leonard took a seat near the edge of the circle. Didn't say much, just adjusted his coat on the back of the chair and set the folder on his lap, one hand resting on it. Angela stepped into the center. She cleared her throat softly, more like she was preparing to lead a seminar than speak to family. "Thank you, everyone, for being here today," she began. "We've gathered to have an open and honest discussion about the future, specifically about the trust, Dad's trust, and how we can make sure it's managed with transparency and shared responsibility." Leonard didn't flinch. Angela continued. "This isn't a confrontation. It's just a check-in, a family check-in. But given some recent concerns about oversight and communication, a few of us thought it would be appropriate to talk about the possibility of appointing a new trustee." Murmurs. Shifts in chairs. Someone coughed. One of Leonard's nephews reached for a cookie without looking up. Leonard sat still, his posture unchanged. Angela walked over to a small easel that held a printed-out sheet. Some half-baked flowcharts with words like roles, votes, and legacy planning. She tapped the board. "I think we can all agree that Dad has done a great job managing things over the years. We respect that, but he's also getting older, and it's not unreasonable to ask whether it might be time to think about transition. Peacefully, respectfully." Still, Leonard said nothing. Angela smiled wider. "We're not lawyers. We're not forcing anything, but we thought it might be helpful to do a quick vote, just to see where everyone stands. Informally, of course." She walked back to the center and clasped her hands. "All those in favor of appointing a new trustee, please raise your hand." Leonard scanned the room. Slowly, hesitantly, one hand after another went up. Marcus didn't raise his right away, but after Angela glanced over at him, just for a second, he lifted his, barely halfway. More followed. Aunt Darlene, eyebrows raised like she wasn't sure what she was voting on. Uncle Paul, staring straight ahead but raising his hand anyway. Even cousin Elaine, who'd always said Leonard was the only one who ever kept the books right. One by one, the hands rose. Angela beamed. Thank you all. This isn't binding, obviously, but it helps guide the conversation. Leonard remained still. After the last hand was raised, the room turned to him, all eyes, waiting for a reaction, a rebuttal, a protest, something. But he didn't give them one. Not yet. Angela folded her clipboard to her chest and walked closer. Dad, we can't force this, of course. But I think the family is telling us something. It's not personal. It's just time. Leonard looked up slowly. His eyes weren't angry, just tired. Tired in a way that came from too many meetings where folks already had their minds made up before the first word was said. He reached down, opened the folder, and unfolded a document with deliberate care. Not rushed, not defensive, just sure. Angela blinked. Leonard's voice was calm, quiet, but full of gravity. You all finished? She opened her mouth, but he raised a hand slightly, just enough to make her stop. Then, gently, he turned the document around to face the room. Because this isn't a family poll. This is a legally bound trust. And according to Section 8, right here, trusteeship is not reassigned by vote. It is only altered by incapacity, resignation, or court order. He tapped the county seal stamped at the bottom. Official, dated, registered. And I haven't resigned. I haven't been declared incapacitated. And I don't see a judge in the room. Do you? Silence. Angela's face went flat. Marcus looked down again. One of the cousins coughed into his hand. Leonard leaned back slightly and folded his hands over the document. So with all due respect, your aunts don't change a thing. For a full 10 seconds, no one said a word. Angela's lips parted slightly, like she meant to speak, but the sound didn't come. She stared at the paper Leonard had just placed in front of her like it was written in a language she didn't recognize. Leonard didn't move. He didn't smirk or shift in his chair. He just looked at her calmly, like a man watching a child explain how the TV works while holding the remote upside down. Marcus cleared his throat and lowered his hand into his lap. His face was unreadable, tired maybe, or maybe just used to this kind of moment. The kind where he stood behind someone else's voice and waited to see which way the wind blew. Angela recovered quickly. Too quickly. Well, she said with a forced laugh, this isn't about legality, Dad. This is about harmony. You're making this feel hostile. No, Leonard interrupted, voice soft but firm. I'm making it accurate. Angela blinked. The room shifted. Chairs squeaked. A cousin near the back leaned forward just slightly, suddenly more interested. Leonard kept going, slow and steady. You brought all these people here to hold a vote, told them it was about legacy, framed it like concern. But what you really wanted was a transfer of power, without the paperwork, without the process, and without understanding what you're even touching. Angela stepped back, crossing her arms. You're being dramatic. Leonard's voice didn't change. No, I'm being exact. He lifted the second page of the document. The language was plain. He'd written it that way on purpose when the trust was created 10 years ago. His lawyer had suggested legal jargon. Leonard had said, if it takes a dictionary to read, it's not protection. It's a trap. And so Section 8 had remained simple. No trustee shall be removed by consensus, opinion, or family votes. Only by voluntary resignation, certified medical incompetence, or judgment by a legal body with jurisdiction. Leonard pointed to the clause. There it is, in black and white. You could have asked me about it. Could have read it before planning a vote, but you didn't want the truth. You wanted the outcome. Angela's jaw clenched. You're twisting this. We were trying to help you. Help me, he said, and now his voice had a trace of iron. You just tried to orchestrate a coup at a folding table with styrofoam coffee cups. You printed flyers. You passed around a clipboard like this was a bake sale. If this is how you handle serious matters, Angela, you don't deserve stewardship over a key, much less a trust. A few eyes widened. Some looked away, but no one spoke. Angela turned to the group, trying to recover. Come on, y'all. This doesn't have to be hostile. We've all seen him forget things. We've all heard the stories. What stories? Leonard asked, calm as ever. Angela faltered. That you've been slow to respond, or that you got confused at the doctor's office. I signed in before the nurse even called my name. I brought a typed list of every medication I take, color-coded by dosage. Would you like to see it? Angela didn't answer. Leonard reached into his folder, pulled out another sheet. His last 6 appointment slips. Each stamped, each attended, each showing full function. Underestimate me if you want. Just know I keep receipts longer than memories. A soft laugh came from the back. Someone hadn't meant to let it out, but it broke the tension like a dropped plate. Angela spun on her heel toward Marcos. Say something! Marcos didn't move, didn't even lift his eyes. She snapped again, sharper this time. Marcos! He finally looked up, looked at his father, then at his wife. I told you, this wasn't the way, he muttered. Angela stepped back like she'd been slapped. Leonard folded the papers and slid them back into the folder. Then, for the first time since sitting down, he stood. I came here today out of respect, he said. Respect for the people in this room, even the ones who raised their hands without knowing what they were voting for. I figured maybe someone would ask me first. But you didn't ask. You assumed. He looked around the room, measured, slow. You assumed that age means weakness, that quiet means ignorance, that being prepared means being controlling. But let me be clear. I didn't spend my whole life earning this family's trust just to let someone overwrite it with a clipboard and a smile. No one moved. No one said a word. Angela's arms were still crossed, but her hands had begun to grip her elbows, tight enough to turn her knuckles pale. Leonard nodded once. Y'all do what you want after today, but if you want to change something that's mine, something I've built, protected, and legally documented, you're gonna need more than a room full of raised hands. He turned toward the table, poured himself a paper cup of coffee like nothing had happened, took one sip, winced. Cold, he muttered. They walked out to the side door, not storming, not defeated, just done. He didn't slam the door behind him, didn't look back. Leonard simply stepped outside, let the cool air bite at his cheeks, and walked toward the side lot. The snow had stopped sometime during the vote, leaving the parking lot crusted over with that gritty grey mix of slush and salt. His boots crunched over it as he made his way to his car, a faded navy Lincoln that ran smoother than it looked. He didn't drive off, not yet. He opened the door, sat down in the driver's seat, folder still in hand, and exhaled slowly. The kind of breath you take when something you knew was coming finally arrived. He didn't feel satisfaction, not pride, just clarity. They had really done it, a whole vote, in a church hall, over coffee and cookies, like it was nothing more than a family game night. And what struck him most wasn't the attempt, it was the confidence, the certainty on Angela's face, the silence from Marcos, the way the others had followed along, not because they agreed, but because silence felt easier than standing alone. He turned the key once. Engine rumbled to life, then turned it off again. He wasn't ready to go home yet. Inside the church, meanwhile, The temperature had shifted, not in degrees but in presence. The air felt heavier now, not because Leonard had left, but because the room didn't know what to do with itself in his absence. Angela still stood near the center, clipboard drooping slightly at her side. Her voice, so steady just 15 minutes earlier, had gone quiet. Marcos sat in his chair, elbows on knees, hands clasped in front of his face like a man waiting on a verdict he already knew was coming. Cousin Gerald was the first to break the silence. So, that's it? Angela straightened. No, no, it's not it. We were just trying to initiate a conversation. He's being dramatic. Aunt Ruby raised an eyebrow. Seemed pretty straightforward to me. That document looked official. It's outdated, Angela said quickly. Trusts can be amended if we all agree. But we didn't all agree, interrupted a soft voice from the back. It was Elaine, one of Leonard's nieces, usually too quiet to speak unless asked. Angela turned toward her. You raised your hand. Elaine shrugged. I did? Because I thought we were just voting to help. I didn't know you were trying to remove him outright. Angela started pacing now, voice speeding up. He's getting older. He's slower to respond to emails. There have been missed meetings. He missed one, Gerald corrected. Last year, because of a dentist appointment. Angela's jaw tightened. The meeting, if you could still call it that, was unraveling. The votes, once held high, were now regrets. People started shifting in their seats, glancing at the clock, avoiding eye contact. I just wanted to have a conversation, Angela insisted again. Voice sharper now. If we can't even talk about these things as a family, then what are we doing? You didn't ask, Ruby said. You announced. Angela looked at Marcos. Say something, she whispered. He looked up slowly, eyes bloodshot but focused. You didn't tell me you were doing all this, he said. I told you my concerns. You didn't say you were planning a vote. You didn't tell me you printed charts. You didn't say you booked the hall and sent out that group email like this was a shareholder meeting. Angela's face flushed. Because I knew you'd try to stop me. He stood. That's not an excuse. That's the problem. Angela looked stunned, as if she hadn't expected him to actually speak up. Not now. I'm not saying Dad's perfect, Marcos continued. He's stubborn. He's slow sometimes. But he's always had the paperwork, the details, the receipts. You wanted to lead? You should have come with more than a pitch. Nobody clapped. Nobody cheered. But the energy in the room shifted again, this time back toward reality. Angela's voice lowered. You're siding with him? Marcos shook his head. I'm siding with the truth. Angela sat down. Not because she wanted to, but because she no longer had ground to stand on. Out in the car, Leonard finally exhaled one last time. He turned the key again, and this time the engine stayed on. He backed out slowly, turned toward the main road, and drove past the front of the church. Through the window, he saw the blurred shapes of his family, seated, scattered, quieter than they'd been in a long time. He didn't wave, didn't honk. I didn't need their approval in that hall. I had the county CA in my lap. Leonard didn't go straight home. Instead, he took the long way, down quiet side streets he hadn't driven in years. He passed old brick houses that had once belonged to men he'd known from the shop. Some of them were gone now. Others were in homes with noses, names scratched onto clipboards they never asked to carry. And some had just vanished from the picture, swallowed up by the silence that sometimes comes after a certain age. But not him, not today. He parked outside Mason and Carter Law, the small firm he'd used for years. Nothing fancy, just a converted two-story house near the courthouse. They knew his name when he walked in. Still kept a yellowed file cabinet with his name on the drawer. The receptionist smiled. Hey there, Mr. Harris. You got a minute for Felicia? Leonard nodded. I got all the minutes in the world today. He sat down across from Felicia Morrison. He's a state lawyer and one of the few people who knew just how organized Leonard truly was. She wore reading glasses on a chain and never once offered fake sympathy, just clarity. "I heard," she said before he even sat down. "The vote." Leonard grunted. "They held it like we were choosing a potluck committee." Felicia cracked a smile. "And I shut it down." He laid the folder on her desk, opened it, and showed her the same document he'd unfolded in the church hall. Section 8, underlined, annotated, and sealed. She leaned over it and nodded slowly. "Still holds, still binding, still ironclad." Leonard tapped the margin. "Thought I'd just swing by and make sure no amendments slipped past me." Felicia shook her head. "No changes since the last update. You've got full authority, Leonard. The only way you lose control of that trust is if you hand it over, drop dead, or get declared incompetent by a judge." Leonard folded the paper back up, neat as always. "They tried to pressure folks," he said. "Didn't think I'd bring the paperwork." "People rarely do," Felicia replied. There was a long pause, the kind that stretched, not because there was nothing left to say, but because there was too much that didn't need saying. Then Leonard broke it. "Thing is, I wasn't even mad. Not at first. But it was the way they did it. No conversation. Just walked in like I owe them an explanation for still being upright." Felicia raised an eyebrow. "They think you're holding something they're entitled to. They think a role you earn is up for auction," Leonard said. "All because I still know how to use a fax machine and keep a copy of every damn receipt." Felicia slid the folder back toward him. "You want me to file a formal cease and desist? It won't stop them from talking, but it'll keep them from trying anything legal." Leonard shook his head. "Not yet. Let them stew in the silence." She leaned back in her chair, arms folded. "You know, most people your age would have folded under that kind of pressure, given up just to avoid the noise." Leonard gave a half smile. "I don't win arguments. I win by the ink, already dry, on the page." They shared a quiet laugh. Real, this time. Familiar. As Leonard stood to leave, Felicia added one more thing. "Be careful, Leonard. You didn't humiliate them. You just reminded them they weren't prepared. And some folks don't handle truth as gracefully as they pretend to." He paused with his hand on the doorknob. "I didn't go there to embarrass anyone. I went to remind them the rules don't disappear just because someone wants them to." Felicia nodded. "Still, keep your eyes open." Leonard tipped his hat and left. Back home, the house was quiet, not empty, just resting. He hung up his coat, took off his boots, and set the folder down on the dining table. The sunlight was starting to fade through the blinds, casting long slats of shadow across the hardwood. He didn't rush to make dinner. He wasn't hungry yet. Instead, he opened the folder one more time, not to check anything, but just to feel the weight of it. Not just the paper, but the work behind it, the care, the preparation. There was something sacred about being ready when others expected you not to be. He set the folder aside and walked to the record player in the corner, pulled out an old Miles Davis album, blew a speck of dust off the edge, dropped the needle gently. Soft horns filled the room. Warm, slow, certain. Leonard sat in his favorite chair, hands resting on the arms, eyes closed. It wasn't victory. It was something better. Stillness and a room no one could vote him out of. Leonard didn't plan to return to the church hall that week. But sometimes the world had a different schedule than the one written on the back of your fridge. By Thursday, a new message thread had popped up in the extended family group chat. One Leonard wasn't even in, but got forwarded to him anyway by his cousin Gerald. Emergency follow-up regarding Dad's trustee role. Angela says we need clarity on who's technically in charge. Meeting Friday evening. Church hall again. Technically. That word stuck with him like something gritty between the teeth. Leonard didn't respond, didn't send a message, didn't call anyone. He simply pulled the folder back out of the drawer and opened it again. Then he pulled a second folder marked Trust Formation 2013 and began laying out tabs. Section 3, Section 7, Section 8. He'd kept it all. Originals and duplicates, black and white printouts and the notarized yellow copies. He even had the audio transcription from the day it was signed. His voice, clear as a bell, reading out the authority clauses while witnesses initialed each page. By the time Friday evening rolled around, Leonard wasn't dressed up, just slacks and a cardigan. No coat, even though it was cold. He wasn't staying long. He walked into the church hall 5 minutes after the posted time. They had already started. Angela stood again near the front, this time with a printed slide deck, cheap paper clipped at the top, one handed to each person in the circle. Her expression was tighter now, less performative, more defensive. When Leonard entered, the room turned. "Dad," she said, "we weren't sure if you were coming." Leonard nodded once and took a seat. Angela cleared her throat. "Everyone, thank you for coming back. After our last meeting, there was some confusion and some tension. I want to address that head on and say we didn't mean for anything to feel hostile." Leonard said nothing. Angela continued. "That said, we still believe there's a gap in understanding about how this trust functions. Some of the documents are older. Language can be interpreted in different ways." "Is that so?" Leonard asked calmly. She pressed on. "We had a paralegal friend review it. They said there may be an opportunity for a secondary vote if the family has a shared concern." And Leonard opened the folder. One clean motion. The sound of a tab sliding back made Angela pause. "Would you mind if I read something?" he asked. She hesitated. "We're not trying to argue. I didn't ask if you were. I asked if I could read something." She nodded once. Leonard pulled out the certified page, thick with weight, and held it at chest level. "Section 8 of the Harris Family Living Trust," he said, letting his voice carry just enough to reach the corners of the room. Quote, "No amendment to trustee authority shall be recognized unless signed by the primary trustee and witnessed by two non-beneficiaries under conditions of mental and legal competence." He let that hang, then continued. Further, no vote by family members, formal or informal, shall be binding in matters of trustee assignments unless said vote is certified through a court of records and in alignment with paragraph 9. He lowered the page. "That's not my wording," he added. "That's the exact clause we drafted, with my lawyer present and your husband seated 2 chairs to my left." He nodded when we wrote it. Might even remember. Angela's mouth moved, but no sound came. Leonard wasn't finished. "This trust isn't a suggestion. It's not a hand-me-down or a discussion prompt. It's a binding legal structure, not a family poll." He placed the page down on the table in front of him. Flat, neat. Angela stared at it like it might burst into flames. From the side of the room, Cousin Elaine said softly, "Well, that settles that." Angela turned. "This doesn't mean we're not allowed to express concerns." "No one said you couldn't express anything," Leonard replied. "But you tried to act, and now you're learning. Action comes with requirements." Marcus spoke for the first time since Leonard arrived. "Can I see that?" he asked. Leonard nodded and slid the page across the table. Marcus picked it up, reading line by line. His eyes moved slowly. Mouth a thin line. When he finished, he placed the page back down carefully. "He's right," he said. Angela gave him a sharp look. "You're siding with him again?" "No," Marcus replied. "I'm siding with the truth again." There was silence. This time, no one coughed. No one reached for coffee. No one shuffled in their seats. They just watched. Leonard stood. He looked at the room like a teacher watching students realize the answer had been in the book the whole time. "I've kept every document, every version, every signature, every notarization, not because I expected you to try this, but because I knew what happens when people start treating facts like feelings." Angela opened her mouth again. He raised a hand gently. "And before you say I'm being cold, understand something. This isn't about a title. It's about trust. And you lost mine the moment you turned a church basement into a courtroom without permission." He turned, gathered his folder, and walked slowly toward the exit. Just before he reached the door, he paused, didn't turn back, just said, "Your voices are loud, but this clause is louder." Then he was gone. Angela didn't speak for a long time after Leonard left. She just stood there, blinking at the door like it might reopen, like he might come back and soften the edge of what he'd said. But he didn't. He wouldn't. And everyone in the room knew it. The silence stretched. Finally, Aunt Ruby shifted in her chair and let out a sigh. "Well, that was uncomfortable," she muttered, reaching for her purse. That was the signal. The unspoken cue that things had gone as far as they could go without turning into something worse. One by one, chairs scraped the floor as people started to gather their things, slowly, awkwardly, like they didn't want to be the first one to bolt, but also didn't want to stay. Angela's fingers curled tighter around her clipboard. "I didn't mean for it to go like this," she said, almost to herself. Nobody responded right away. Then Gerald, standing near the table, offered a dry chuckle. "You might not have meant it, but you sure organized it like you did." Angela turned toward him, jaw clenched. "You all just followed him because he talks slow and carries a folder." Elaine, quiet, mild Elaine, cut in. "No, Angela. We followed him because his folder had proof. It wasn't said with hits. It wasn't even said loudly, but it carried more weight than anything that had been printed on Angela's handouts." Angela looked at Marcus, as if searching for rescue, but he wasn't looking at her. He stood near the edge of the table, staring down at the single sheet of paper Leonard had left behind. A copy of the trust clause, laminated and sealed with the county registrar's stamp. She hissed under her breath, "You're seriously just going to let this happen?" Marcus finally looked up. "You mean, let the truth stand?" he said. "Yeah, I am." Angela took a step back. "I stood by you," she said. "I did this for both of us." "You did it without asking me," Marcus replied. "You didn't stand by me. You stepped over him." Someone near the door let out a low whistle. Angela straightened. "Fine," she said coldly. "If you all want to sit around and let him control everything until he's in the ground, be my guest." Ruby shot her a look. "That man built the roof over your husband's head. Don't talk like he's a burden." Angela opened her mouth, but whatever comeback she was crafting died before it landed. People were leaving now, not in a rush, but with finality. Some offered quiet nods to Marcus. Some gave Angela a wide berth. One or two whispered under their breath as they passed. Within minutes, the church hall was half empty. Angela stood in the middle, still clutching her clipboard like it might turn into a shield. Marcus walked over to the table and started gathering the handouts. He stacked them slowly, methodically. Like it wasn't just paper, it was evidence of something that didn't work. Angela's voice cracked as she asked, "Are we seriously just going to pretend like this was all nothing?" "No one's pretending," Marcus said. "We're moving on." She looked away. Her shoulders slumped just enough for the veneer to crack. The confidence had been shaken, but the resentment remained. It always did, with people who got caught expecting applause. Marcos grabbed the last of the flyers and dropped them into the recycling bin by the door. Angela finally let go of the clipboard, set it down on a chair, and stood there, frozen, like she didn't know what to do with her hands anymore. Outside, the cold evening air slapped Marcus across the face like truth rarely did. He walked to his car in silence. No music or no phone calls. Just the sound of tires rolling by on the street and the echo of his father's voice replaying over and over again in his head. Come with paperwork. He sat behind the wheel and didn't start the engine right away. He thought about the house, about the trust, about the years he'd assumed Leonard would just pass things down like inheritance was an obligation instead of a decision. Angela had pushed too far, but maybe he'd let her, and maybe that was worse. Back at Leonard's house, things looked the same as always. He'd come in, made himself a small plate of leftovers, and poured a glass of water. No wine, no celebration, just nourishment, fuel for the evening. The folder sat on the table, closed now. He'd said all he needed to say. No need to repeat himself. He wiped down the counters, turned off the lights, sat in his favorite chair by the window and listened to the sound of the wind hitting the pane. No music this time, no radio, just the soft tick of the clock in the hallway. He wasn't thinking about Angela. He wasn't even thinking about Marcos. He was thinking about how many people he'd known who hadn't kept records, who trusted family to be fair, to be patient, to wait. And how many of them had been buried before the ink was even dry on the paperwork that took everything they had. That wouldn't be him. Not now. Not ever. The next morning came without fuss. No calls, no texts, no doorstep drama. Just the kind of early quiet Leonard liked best. The kind that lets you measure your breathing against the tick of the clock and know the house was still yours. He stood at the kitchen window sipping his tea, watching the snow melt off the hood of his car. It had been a mild night. The roads would be clear by noon, and the sun had returned, cutting through the sky with that pale cold brightness unique to Michigan winters. He didn't have anything scheduled. No appointments, no errands, just one thing to do, and he was already doing it, being alive and in control. He walked over to the table where the folder still sat, opened it gently, and added one more paper to the back. A dated summary from his lawyer confirming the trust had not been altered, and any attempts to do so without proper authority would be considered invalid. He slipped it into a clear sleeve, snapped the binder rings closed, and ran his thumb along the spine. 7 tabs, 28 documents, 1 line of defense. He nodded to himself, then closed the folder and slid it back into the drawer where it belonged. Out of sight, but never out of reach. Mid-morning, his house phone rang. He let it go 3 times before answering. Leonard Harris. Dad? It was Marcos. Leonard leaned on the counter with one hand. Voice neutral. Son? A beat. I just wanted to say, I didn't know she was going to take it that far. Leonard didn't respond right away. I mean, I knew she had concerns, Marcos continued. We talked about it. But I didn't know she was planning a whole meeting. Flyers, votes. Leonard took a sip of his tea before answering. You didn't ask any questions when the chairs were already in a circle. I know, Marcos said quietly. Another pause. I'm not mad, Leonard said. But I am clear. Marcos exhaled. So what does that mean for us? Leonard looked out of the window. It means I still love you, he said. But next time someone tries to take what's mine, I expect you to say something before I have to. Marcos didn't answer right away. Then, I understand. Do you? Leonard asked. Not harsh, just curious. I do now. Leonard nodded to himself. Then Marcos said something unexpected. She's staying with her sister for a while. Leonard raised an eyebrow. She leave or you ask her to? I asked her to, Marco said. Told her we needed space. Told her I needed to think. Leonard didn't gloat. Didn't say good. Just said, all right. Another silence. This one less heavy. You coming by Sunday? Leonard asked. I want to. Then come early. Bring an empty stomach. I'm making roast. Marcus chuckled softly. All right, sounds good. They hung up without ceremony. That afternoon, Leonard stood in his backyard in a light jacket, looking over the wooden fence he'd repaired last summer. It still held strong. He turned and looked at the house. Brick, 2 stories, windows clean. He'd paid the place off 15 years ago and hadn't missed a single tax bill since. They'd tried to vote him out of it, with hand raises, with whispers, with assumptions. He chuckled to himself. Just once. Then he walked back inside and made a list for Sunday's dinner. Chalk roast, carrots, onions, fresh bread, and that brand of hot sauce Marcus always pretended was too strong, but still used anyway. If family was going to come through the door again, he wanted them to come through it reminded of who still kept the light on. Not because they deserved it, but because that's just who he was. And they'd seen that now. All of them. Not by his words, but by his papers. Leonard always believed that how you walked out of a room mattered more than how you entered it. You could come in loud, confident, dressed up in titles or tone, but how you left, that told the truth. And last Friday, when he walked out of that church hall with nothing but a folder and a quiet sentence, he hadn't slammed the door. He hadn't lingered for effect. He'd simply left. And now, days later, the door hadn't reopened. No one had knocked. No one had called to clarify or soften anything that had been said. The silence wasn't awkward. It was earned. That morning, Leonard took a slow walk around the neighborhood. Just a quiet lap. Coat zipped, hat low, boots crunching on patchy sidewalks. He passed the house with the crooked shutters, the corner where old Mr. Daly used to sit in a lawn chair and wave at passing cars. The duplex where some new couple had just moved in. Young, energetic, and unaware of the block's rhythm. The world kept moving. Bills still came. Trash still had to go out. But something about it all felt cleaner now. Like one room in the house had been aired out, and the smell of bad intentions had finally gone stale. When he returned home, Leonard took out the folder again, not because he needed it, but because he wanted to feel the weight. He flipped through it slowly. Each page carried a memory, the clause he'd drafted with Felicia, the page where his wife had signed her portion before she passed. The little yellow post-it he'd added in 2016 that simply read, double-check power of attorney by spring. Preparation wasn't paranoia. It was peace, and every sheet was proof. That afternoon, he sat on the porch, hands wrapped around a cup of hot tea. The wind had picked up, rattling the flag on the neighbor's stoop. A few cars passed. A dog barked 2 blocks over. Nothing urgent, just a good day to be old and right. Around 3, a car pulled up out front. Angela. She didn't get out right away, just sat behind the wheel, eyes focused on the steering wheel, like she was still deciding whether the ignition or the brake deserved her trust. Leonard didn't move. Eventually, she stepped out, walked slowly up the path, her heels clacking softly against the cement. She didn't have a clipboard, didn't have a file, didn't even have a purse. Just a coat too thin for the cold, and a look that landed somewhere between regret and calculation. Leonard stayed seated. Angela stopped at the base of the porch steps. Hi! Leonard nodded. She looked around, as if hoping someone else would interrupt. No one did. I wanted to apologize, she said finally. Leonard raised an eyebrow slightly, but said nothing. Angela continued. I let my pride get ahead of me. I thought I was protecting Marcus. The family. I thought I knew better. Leonard sipped his tea. That's a lot of thinking, he said. Angela didn't flinch. I understand if you don't forgive me. Leonard looked at her for a long moment. Then, you didn't come here for forgiveness. Angela shifted. No, I didn't. You came to see if the door's still open. She blinked. Is it? Leonard stood slowly, walked down the steps until he stood just a few feet from her. He didn't speak with anger. He didn't raise his voice, but his words landed heavy. I built this family with sweat, discipline, and receipts, not permission, and certainly not votes. Angela swallowed hard. Leonard continued. You want to be part of this family? Fine, be part of it. Cook something. Show up. Ask how people are doing without waiting for a piece of paper. He stepped back toward the porch, then paused. But if you ever try to use your voice to speak louder than the facts again, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Angela nodded slowly. I understand. Leonard turned, walked back to his chair, and sat. Angela didn't follow. She returned to her car, pulled off gently, and didn't look back. As the sun lowered, Leonard flipped open his notebook and wrote one more line beneath the last entry. A vote means nothing when the rules are written in ink. He closed the cover. The porch lights clicked on. Another day, sealed shut. The next day felt like any other, and that's exactly how Leonard wanted it. He wasn't interested in grand conclusions or dramatic reconciliations. He didn't want to sit around recounting how he put them in their place. That kind of noise was for people who needed attention. Leonard had never needed it. What he needed, what he valued, was order, truth, and a home where the walls still held the sound of the life he'd built, not the voices of people trying to push him out of its side. The folder rested in its usual place on the kitchen table that morning. Closed, clean, just slightly worn at the corners. He didn't open it this time. Didn't need to. He already knew every document, every clause, every signature inside. What he did instead was walk over to the drawer where he kept extra file labels, pull one free, and grab a pen. He wrote, Bylaws, updated and respected. He peeled the back off and placed it squarely across the tab. Not for show, just for himself. Later that afternoon, he sat with a bowl of soup and the day's newspaper. He read slowly, underlining a few stories out of habit. Old Union instincts never quite went away. Halfway through his reading, he got a text from Marcus. Bringing rolls and ice cream sundae. See you by 2? Leonard smiled faintly. Simple, informal. No tension clinging to the message. Just like it used to be. He typed back, Good. Door'll be open. And bring the good butter this time. He set the phone down, folded the paper, and looked around the room. Same old walls, same light fixture, same kitchen table he'd eaten meals at with Gloria, with Marcus when he was little, and later alone. It wasn't grand, but it was his. Not because of sentiment, because of records, because he had never treated his position as temporary. At sunset, he made one last round through the house, checked the locks, turned off the living room lights, made sure the front mat was centered. Then he walked into the back room, his little study, and opened the locked cabinet where the important things lived. He took out a separate folder, a thinner one. Inside, a copy of the trust, a list of emergency contacts, and a handwritten note titled, What to Do If I'm Gone. He sat with it for a moment, then pulled a second note from the drawer and placed it behind it. This one read, What to do if they try before I'm gone. He chuckled once, not loud. Then shut the drawer and turned the key. Sunday came like clockwork. The smell of roast filled the house. Carrots, onions, and gravy simmered on the stove. The kitchen window fogged at the corners. Marcos arrived just before 2, as promised. He brought rolls, ice cream, and Mia, who hadn't stopped smiling since she walked through the door. Leonard greeted them both like nothing had ever happened, because in his mind, nothing had. At least, nothing worth dwelling on. Angela didn't come. No one mentioned her. Mia sat beside him at the table, asking questions about old family photos. Marcos helped set the plates. Leonard carved the roast with steady hands and told a story about the time his own father lost a fight with a gas grill and ended up with no eyebrows for 3 weeks. They laughed. They ate. They lived. No clipboard, no votes, no tension. Just family, willing to sit down without trying to take anything over. After the dishes were done, after the leftovers packed away, Leonard stood at the door and watched his granddaughter and son walk to the car. Same time next week? Marcos called. Leonard raised a hand. Don't be late. The car pulled away. He closed the door, turned the lock, and walked back into his quiet, still house. Not empty, just full of order. He passed the kitchen table where the folder still sat. He didn't touch it, didn't need to. It had already spoken, and no one had to raise a hand to know who was still in charge. What would you do if your own family tried to vote you out of something you built? And do you think Leonard handled it the right way? By letting them speak first, then showing the facts? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear how you'd handle it. If this story hit home, hit that like button. It helps more folks find it. Make sure you're subscribed and tap that bell so you don't miss tomorrow's new one. And if you've ever had to remind someone that titles don't come by vote, share this video with them. Watch one of our other stories on screen now, and I'll see you tomorrow, same time.